This is the April 30th meeting of the Newcastle Planning Commission. I should say it is a special meeting to conduct some business about the comprehensive plan. I'm the chair, Charlie Gadzik. Would you join me in a flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Director Fitzgibbons, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Marsh?
Here.
Commissioner Quigg?
Here.
Commissioner Lowe? Not here yet. Commissioner Van Atta?
I'm here.
Vice Chair Kennard?
Here.
And Chair Gatzik.
Here. Okay, we'll begin with the agenda approval. I would like to propose a change in the agenda to add commissioner comments, which, because this was a kind of a special meeting, we didn't include that originally, but I would like to propose that. Does anybody have any other changes they'd like to make to the agenda? Does anybody object to adding commissioner comments to the agenda? Okay. And we will change it as such. Let's move commissioner comments to, well, let's do that right now, and then we'll have public comment. So I do have a comment, but I will offer other commissioners the opportunity to speak first.
Actually, I don't normally speak, but I really, after last week's meeting? Jeez. I actually got a couple of texts. People were watching. There's always you guys and other people in the audience. I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate everybody's engagement. We've gone lots of meetings where there's not a soul online or in the room, so it's really nice to see people engaged. So I just wanted to thank people for that.
Kind of piggybacking on what Paul just said, I love the community engagement too. I feel like we've gone out of our way beyond anything I've ever been a part of to reach out to the public. All of the personal meetings we had, the penny poll, Charlie's penny poll. Hi, Maggie. I'm very proud of how we've reached out to all the different communities through like HOAs, through like, the social media, everything we've done, that we went through the survey inside out and backwards. And so to the extent we're going to have a council member planning commission meeting, as much as we can draw on all the input and reflect as best, I think that's in my opinion, that's kind of our job. I mean, we're here because we volunteered to volunteer our time. I see myself as kind of a conduit for what the public wants. They don't want to sit down and go through all the stinky verbiage and laws and all this stuff and listen to all this stuff. So our job is just kind of implement what they want. That's why I see my job on the HOA. That's why I see my job on the Planning Commission. And so I'm just excited to see the town hall full of people. I'm excited for the council joint session. And I think whatever feedback we've gotten from the council members, whatever comments we've gotten in public forums, we should just try to throw it all in the basket and do the best we can to discuss the issues. And I just wanted to thank Aaron I know you've worked with Amy George and the city to make sure the word gets out. And like Paul said, I'm hearing comments pretty regularly from people who are like, hey, Jim, what about this? Hey, what about that? So it's working. I love it.
Thank you. Any other commissioners wish to speak? Okay. I wanted to say a few things about commission processes, specifically email communications. From time to time, I will send something to the commission, information typically to be considered at a meeting, and to comply with the state's open meetings laws, both in the letter and the spirit. We need to be very careful that any email that I send to the whole commission, or any email that you commissioners send to the rest of us, does not generate a conversation, because that becomes a meeting. And we've talked about this before, but in the most recent case that I sent one out, a couple of commissioners replied to it, and I realized that they had a different interpretation of the law than I was interpreting. I think they were interpreting it that as long as they didn't reply all, they were complying. But what I'd actually like is that nobody replies to those things that I send out to everybody. I think that'll keep us more firmly on the safe side of in compliance. So I did leave each of the commissioners a document that was shared with our city clerk about a month ago, just as a reminder. Yeah, yeah, that's the one that Jim is holding up. So, okay, that was my only comment about that. We will now open the public comment period. Would anyone in the audience like to comment? We have a couple of guests here tonight, and both of them are saying they are declining the opportunity to come, so we will close the public comment period and move to general business. Our purpose tonight is to talk about and prepare for the meeting with the City Council. And I'll say a few words, and then Director Fitzgibbons will say a few words. Let me first say that I don't really know how the council will structure that meeting. I don't know that they've had a chance to give it any thought. Maybe they won't until it gets close to the meeting. But I think what I expect we will do, well, there's two things. One, we have agreed that we're going to send the council a memo in advance, and that's one of the things we'll discuss tonight, to identify for them what we think are the most significant changes in the comp plan that we are appearing to recommend. We haven't taken any formal votes on any language. There's still a lot of work to do, but in all of the work that we've done so far, where we've discussed possibilities, the things that we have general agreement on that rise to a level of significance, we want to bring those to the attention of the council. I expect that every member of the council that has an opinion on that is going to share that opinion with us. And the council may ask us about the changes that are contained in this memo. Each of you should feel free to respond to any question that the council raises, especially if it's about an element that you are the expert on. If we are asked to take a position, I think we should respectfully decline to take a position, because that's something that we can take up later in a meeting. If there's input from any of the council members, we're there to listen to it and to consider it and to discuss it at one of our later meetings. So I'm not discouraging you from expressing an opinion. I'm just saying you don't feel like you have to. Let me stop right there and ask if there's anybody has any questions about that.
We're gonna go through this memo piece by piece, right?
Yes, and I realized that everything I just said was not being picked up by my microphone. I had my microphone off, so I'm not going to repeat it. I think it's all commission process business. But any other questions or comments at this point?
So I have a question. Are we only going to discuss the items listed here, or I noticed, maybe I didn't read carefully, land use was not here? Or?
Yes, let me address that. I was going to actually turn to that. So this memo was intended just to be like a discussion starter for us. This is one way we could approach the memo, and these are some of the things that I thought would rise to the level of significance from the council's point of view. One of the things we should do tonight is amend this, or assuming you like this approach. I guess first thing is, if you don't like the approach, we should come up with a different approach. But if you like this approach, we should make sure that anything that you think is important should be reflected here. So the fact that I didn't put it there doesn't mean that it isn't important, and it doesn't mean that it'll be added. Another thing I would like to say about it is, after I sent this out, we made some changes. We meaning Director Fitzgibbons, and made some changes, and I requested a change. She will talk about the changes that she made in her introductory comments. But there was one item that I put on the original memo that had to do with street connectivity that I took off. And the reason I took it off is that I had that, the way I stated that element, it described something that gave the appearance of being a commission decision, which actually was not a commission decision. I was misremembering the conversation. I had conversations with city staff, but not with the commission. And this is not this stage of the game is not a place to introduce things that we haven't come to consensus on. There are still a ways down the road that we need to travel, and there are going to be occasions when we're going to introduce more new things. We're going to be seeing a whole new draft from our consultants. We're going to be looking at actual language down the road, and at that point, I think is a better time to introduce anything that goes beyond what we already agreed upon. But it didn't make sense to go down a tangent of something that we hadn't talked about. So I pulled that. I asked Erin to pull that off the version that she was preparing, where she was adding the things from her point of view. Commissioner Quigg.
To put it bluntly, I disagree. I don't know if we fully agree or have quote-unquote consensus on any of this stuff. I think we're doing the best we can to read the tea leaves of the surveys and the town halls and all the other stuff and the feedback we've gotten from the mayor and such. And one of the memos or letters mentioned connected streets. I know that's something we barely discussed at all, but since we literally had it in writing from a council member, I don't think this needs to be a recitation of what we have consensus on. I think it needs to be a bullet points of topics that we're going to discuss with the people that are ultimately going to have the decision as to what goes in the comprehensive plan. We have the consultants, we have the director, we have us, but ultimately we're going to have to say something about connected streets. There's verbiage in there right now around that. There's a comment from from two council members, I think, around that. I mean, that's just one issue. Like, connected streets is an issue we should probably flesh out a little bit in this meeting with the council members. Do we have consensus between the 7 of us or the 6 of us, whatever it is? No. Nevertheless, in my opinion, at least if they don't want to talk about it, they say, never mind, I didn't mean what I said. Whatever you guys think, that's fine. But I think it's worth discussing. Like, we don't have consensus on the public safety issue, right? I want an element. I want a new element. I am in the minority. I know I'm not going to win that battle. Nevertheless, it's something the mayor brought up, another council member brought up, so we'll probably talk about it. We don't have consensus around public safety. We don't have consensus around connected streets. Nevertheless, I think it's just, we only have one poor bullet point for Maggie's transportation element. Why not just throw connected streets in there? Without any bias or opinion one way or the other, the question is, should we connect the streets or shouldn't we? Should we go with cul-de-sacs or should we have more connected streets? That's a very debatable, interesting issue that the public has, opinions on. And I just think it's worth discussing. So that's my 2 cents. I don't think we have to have an opinion on it in this proposed memo, but I think it could be like in an agenda of things to cover a little bit or a lot. That's my 2 cents. I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other.
So these elements were things that I felt that the commission had discussed and had proposed to change. And my recollection of the conversation about connected streets is that we had quite a bit of discussion, and we decided not to make a change. So, but that's my recollection of the conversation, and that was the basis for what I included on this memo or not. I didn't, so anyway. Other thoughts, Commissioner? About this, about anything I said or about what Commissioner Quigg said?
So I have a thought, not specifically about the approach or the memo. I think it will be evolved, right? This is like a first draft, and we can discuss and to get what we all decided. I just want to mention one thing. read, I think back to January, about there is a lawsuit. Basically is a person in city of Eugene, and they sued the city of Eugene when they have the comprehensive plan, and also in there's a words in terms of the middle housing, and they pointed the 3 errors. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm kind of interpreting what I'm reading. Basically, the court, the final judgment mentioned the one thing is in the plan needs to consider those facility infrastructure plan to basically, if you have middle housing growth or that, you need to, in the plan, you need to consider those. And without considering those, you cannot say you are meeting your planning goal. So I just want to bring this up is since we are doing the comprehensive plan, and middle housing is something we are thinking of, but I think it's also important we need to have the infrastructure, and also if we have deficiency, we need to make sure we fix those deficiencies before we can support the growth. And I will also say if we have our city attorney maybe pull out the case and to see if, because I think the story, the news story I read, eventually they are not a planning committee. They are, I think, something land use board, and they basically adopt the court ruling and made some changes.
I'm not sure what you're requesting as a follow-up or as an action. Can you restate
what
it?
I'm saying, I think this is basically Oregon is ahead of Washington, right? Have this middle housing legal requirement, and there is already basically a case, people filed a lawsuit for basically adopt, because all this, I mean, if you read that, it's basically, it's kind of like what we are doing, but it happened 2 years ago, a year ago. And I'm just saying, if we probably, this is, I don't know if it's a lesson learned or something, we need to, I want to be mindful, not go through some path, it will bring up lawsuit.
Vice Chair Kennard.
So are you talking about concurrency, wherein if a development goes in and the roads aren't sufficient for that development, that the development can't go in? Is that what you're talking about?
They didn't specifically say it like that, but they are saying is you will need to consider you have those facility plan. You cannot just put a zone, give the permit to do the zoning, you go, and then there's no sewage, no road, those kind of facility plan.
So Director Fitzgibbons, don't we have concurrency? So that can't happen here, at least as I understand it. Because you can't develop any of these subdivisions that have gone in without proper and adequate things that will support the development, like roads, like sewer, any of those things. So that's as I understood it. So
yeah, I think I will think they probably also think they have, because they meaning the city of Eugene is being sued by an individual, and also I think there's a developer, but they didn't specifically point out in the plan or in the document. So, I mean, I'm just trying to say, if we want, I mean, like, we can talk those elements, the detail, but on the, higher level, maybe reiterate the concurrence or, I just kind of think this, as I said, Oregon is a year or 2 years ahead of Washington. But they already had a lawsuit, and it was, I think it was concluded January this year, January or February, and so.
My suggestion is if you could find what that case was,
Yeah.
send it to Erin,
Okay.
and she can bring it to the attention of our city attorney so that he's aware of it. Oregon law is different from Washington law, so there might be no relevance whatsoever because our laws are different, but it would be good if we know the case citation to bring it to
Yeah.
his attention.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I understand it's different. It's just from, because their bill is different than our bill, right? But there is definitely some. In my mind, it will be some lesson learned.
Okay. Okay, I want to give Director Fitzgibbons an opportunity to talk before we get into discussing the individual items on this memo, but before we do that, I want to see if we're on the same page in terms of what the memo would cover. And the approach I was proposing was that the memo cover changes where the commission has taken a position. So if we didn't take a position to change something, it would not go on this memo. Do you want this memo to be broader than that?
Did we cover county laws at all? Is that the GM, what's county referred to?
That, Aaron will cover that in a minute.
Have we discussed county stuff at all yet?
No, Aaron will
So,
cover that in her
I'm just-
comments.
I don't mean to be a jerk, but what I heard is we only want to have on this piece of paper stuff we've already got consensus on, and I don't remember county stuff being mentioned yet. So if somebody could just put a little bullet point that says connected streets, I'll stop talking. Because I just want to cover it. I want to hear what people have to say on this issue. Because the reason I do is because there's a family that wants me to bring it up so it's covered. So I've got this mom in my ear right now saying, Jim, bring it up, bring it up. If she doesn't get what she wanted, she doesn't show up to any hearings, that's on her. I just thank you for covering county stuff because I didn't know we had county rules to comply with in addition to state rules.
So there are things that we must comply with that are outside of our control. And those are things that Director Fitzgibbons will talk about in a minute. But those will, if they rise to a level of significance, we would include them on this memo to bring them to the council's attention. However, for the things that are within our control, my suggestion is that we put on this the things that we have already discussed, where we have taken a position that represents a change that is of some significance. So I'm asking if you're comfortable with that approach. Okay, heads have nodded, so that's the approach we'll take. Director Fitzgibbons.
Before I go into what has come up since last Thursday, I wanted to touch on a couple things from the meeting last week. One of them was I would figure out if we could go and have a conversation with SCJ during the regular meeting. We can. All we have to do is notice that we're having a special meeting, that we're going to be having a discussion, and we could go up to the front conference room. Jim, we do not have to notice a cancellation. That is a nice thing that we do. So you're right about that one. So I love learning these things, especially when there are things that seem like formalities that actually aren't. It's just a nice thing we do. So that's great. As City Manager Pingle today asked if we wanted to start at 5:30 instead of 6 to give us more time to talk on the 21st. So if we think that's something we would like to do, then I'm happy to relay that message. Would people be available at 5:30 on a Tuesday?
I think if we're going to have basically 2 meetings, how would we not start a little earlier? SCG's flying all the brilliant people in for this meeting in person. It seems silly to try to schedule a separate meeting with them on Zoom when we got them all here in beautiful Newcastle. I think starting a half an hour early makes sense, Charlie.
Well, wait, do the meetings run in parallel though? Like, can we meet 5:30 to 7? And then at 7, city council's here, and at 7, we're in the conference room?
Yeah.
Have an SCJ meeting? Does that work?
That's how it would be.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if we needed to come back, we would just come back in, and if we needed to go back and talk after we come back in, then we can do that.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have an hour and a half with the city council. I think they'll have a lot of questions,
Okay.
personally.
Do they want an hour and a half with us? I mean, maybe that's an important question.
Audience is just smiling. Okay, well, I'll let city manager know, and our mayor already knows, so there we go with that. Okay, so a few times when we've talked about housing, at least, we've talked about, oh yeah, we're gonna have to accommodate at different levels, and our comprehensive plan currently talks about providing about affordable housing. And I've asked the question a few times of different people, like, well, what does this actually mean? And they're like, oh, well, we just have to show that we can accommodate this kind of housing. So I was on this King County Planning Directors meeting last Thursday, and one of the reviewers of our comp plan is King County, and they adopt these countywide planning policies that are separate from, and I provided everybody with the housing portion and the appendix from the housing with my highlighted portion notes on there. And I can post it in a second here for the audience, but basically, he's like, no, we've been kicking these elements back at people because they're not talking about some of these things that I mentioned on here. There's a focus in here on the extremely low housing, 0 to 30%. There's a focus on addressing historical harms to BIPOC communities and accommodating emergency housing being the temporary type housing. So they provide in this housing document, actually, I'll go ahead and get it on the screen so that everybody can see. They provide in this housing document a breakout of the need. So on this table that we're looking at, you can see that, okay, so baseline supply, so the projected need from demographers in 2044 for Newcastle is a little over 6,950 units. Baseline supply as of 2019 was 5,472. And so the net new need is that 1,480 new units. But of that, approximately 1,000 of our new units are going to come in this, they're saying need to come from this 0 to 30% income bracket. I have a meeting with SCJ on Thursday, and I want to get more information from them on what this looks like in a policy document, because this was sort of the first that I've heard that the county's going to throw it back at us if we don't have it detailed enough. And so that's something I need to find out, but it's also something that if we really have to have this in our comp plan, which we may have to, is going to be something a little bit different to see than what we've all been looking at. for the last several months.
Is there something in writing we can see that says they can veto what we say? Is there, like, is that a state law?
So in this housing document, I mean, this goes back to House Bill, is it 1221, that was adopted in 2021. But there are monitoring requirements. The city's gonna have to report out how many of these units that are being built, and may have to adjust our comp plan in 5 years. If, they're talking about, review comprehensive plan goals, so this is 12 of 46, it's highlighted in your packet. H26 is the goal. Page 48. So they say, offer early guidance and assistance to jurisdictions on comprehensive plan alignment, ensure plans address all housing chapter goals and policies and include required analyses, evaluate the meaningfulness of plan responses to policies in this chapter. And then the collection of the data on the implementation details. So there's a concept in planning, at least in planning and maybe in law in general, of vertical consistency. We have to be consistent with the countywide plans, they have to be consistent with regional plans, and they have to be consistent with the state. And we live in I'm gonna say a more progressive area. And that's where these are coming from.
Aaron, I think when we talked about this earlier, you mentioned that this county body has already gotten plans that did not do this, and they've rejected them. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I think that's what Jim was asking.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Jim. I thought you were just sort of asking me, like,
No,
can they actually do this?
I'm just wondering how much they have an advisory board, they have a council, they have all these things they want to do.
Yeah.
Like, there's probably people in Tukwila that care what we do, that have zero say in what we do.
Right.
Apparently, there's people in King County that can say, nope. I
Yep.
know the residents want this. I know the majority of the council wants this. I know your staff said it, your consultants said it, but you didn't do good enough to go back. Is there really a state law that says we have to get checked off by a King County advisory group of some sort? That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I'm curious how much control, is it an advisory thing, or is it if they don't say, okay, we're toast?
My understanding is that if they, and this is where I'm showing how much I know, but my understanding from reading this document is if they don't say, you know, we've got to get their buy-in, just like we have to get the states. But if somebody knows differently, but yeah, they're sending them back with comments already.
So Jim, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but it sounds to me like you're asking what's the basis for the authority specifically to veto this?
Yeah.
Is it in an RCW? Is it somewhere else? And I think that's what he's looking for a specific site if I'm hearing him.
I understand that, and that's how I took it, but what I'm trying to say is I don't totally know if, where the power comes from, but from what I've read, they must have an authority to do this.
So you can see how this county authority, assuming that they have the authority, could have an impact on our comprehensive plan. And that's why we want to put this in the memo, so that it gets on the city council's radar. Because this is an area that we haven't talked about. We haven't developed any responses to this. It's an area that we will work at over the next few months.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick, I'm just looking at today's comp plan.
Mhm.
It does talk about the, Arch and the countywide, King County. There's the affordability gap. I mean, there's a bunch of data around this
Yeah.
in the current comp plan. So, I mean, it is, at whatever level it was addressed at, 10 years ago, it does have a whole couple pages dedicated to it.
Yeah. And so we're gonna have to take that and break that down more into the brackets. I mean, some of this comes from just the GMPC, the growth management.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, Aaron, I agree, and Scott pointed out, in this first page in the middle, they say they're around to make sure we comply with the goals and policies of the GMA. Great, that's what everybody tries to do, but there's a range of compliance, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I want to dig into this. Clearly, we don't know the answer to the question I've asked 3 times, so I think we should move on, but I think it's important for us to know whose hoops we have to jump through in order to get this thing done. But thank you for highlighting this now and not like in November. This is good timing.
yeah.
So I don't want to, I apologize if I'm jumping too far ahead, I may be, but I guess, so, I mean, I'm looking at this and it's like we've got a whole page of things that may or may not be policy level concepts. We've had no discussion about this, and we just talked about this memo being about what we've discussed and we're gonna be equipped to talk to the city council about. This feels to me like, important as it is, and I think it's totally not understood and not vetted by us, and I guess my feeling is that it might be appropriate to mention that this was raised just in the last week, but we haven't had an opportunity to vet it. It might be worth looking at a little bit more before we try and speak at length about it on the 21st. It seems to me that that's inconsistent with what I thought we were trying to do with the memo here. So that's, and that's not to say that we ignore it, but I think we can say that this has been raised and we're trying to understand what level of compliance we need to have with what the county is saying. And meanwhile, here are the other things that we're prepared to talk about.
I think Director Fitzgibbons will be questioned by the council as much as we are, and this would be an area where we would expect her to be giving any answers. But I think it's a good idea to maybe in the introductory comments to this section to talk about that it was something that has come to our attention only recently.
And just to mention on that list that I provided was really only as an example. And also before I realized that there's a whole list of examples that the county has already provided in this appendix. And another thing I'm not clear on is, and I want to talk to SCJ about, is to what level this is a now thing or a next year zoning code issue. But I know some of our policies are going to have to touch on the different income levels at least. So that's in the RCWs. So anyway, that's all I have to say for now.
So just to add on to that, and maybe Scott's comments too, like, I do feel like maybe it's almost premature to list all this personally. Or we need to create a section like, here's the things we've talked about and we know we're probably going to be in the comp plan updates. Here's the things that we haven't talked about, perhaps at the back page, and put this in the back page of things we haven't talked about.
Commissioners, I wasn't watching heads nod. Are you agreeing with Commissioner Vannatta's suggestion?
Scott and Paul.
Yeah, okay.
I think if we're going to include new things we haven't talked about, we should flag them as things that we haven't talked about. So I agree.
So I think instead of putting that bullet under the housing item, we would put that in a separate section at that. Okay, so why don't we go through this memo now and let's identify things that you think are missing or things that you think are not stated the way that reflects the commission's point of view. So with housing, well, I guess let's start with the introduction. In the second paragraph, there's a change I already would like to make in it, where we say that the commission has not yet voted on any of these. In actual fact, we have voted on these, but we have not voted on the exact wording to the comp plan. We've been voted on the general principle, because things in here reflect general agreement by a majority of the commission. So I would make that change in the introduction. If there's nothing else in the introduction, we can move to the housing section.
Question. I assume we're trying to keep this fairly brief, because I keep wondering, you know, like if the city council reads the first bullet, is this just the conversation starter? Like what's behind it? You know, because I'm thinking like, well, they should probably know that we already allow ADUs to some capacity. We already allow cottages. It's duplexes is new. I mean, that kind of, should we add that kind of background to this to give them a little better flavor of what's really changing, or kind of leave it at a high level and it's a conversation starter?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of wondering the same thing. Paul's 2 for 2 on reading my mind. Yeah, I feel like the sentence works, but I almost wonder if there's bullet points, like the issues we should cover, like where is the new housing going to go is the biggest question we've had to deal with. And that was in the scenarios that we discussed. Is it going to be a mix? Is it going to be all downtown like it was in the last comprehensive plan? Like, you know, where is the housing going to go? Another thing that we're going to have to deal with is the whole issue around the parking issue. I feel like that's a big issue that's come up in the conversations we've had and the comments we've had is the parking for this stuff. And I almost feel like there should be a bullet point, you know. Do we want things we've only got consensus around, or are we just gonna have a conversation with the decision makers around, hey, these are the things that, you know, if you're at Safeway and people are saying, hey, tell me what's going on with the comprehensive plan, you can, you know, you'll be equipped to talk with them about it. Or do we not want to cover stuff that we haven't really already vetted fully as a commission and kind of gotten to consensus on? But I agree with Paul's question. I just don't have the answer, Charlie.
Either.
I think we have to keep it relatively brief. I think, well, let me say, what I hope to obtain from the council meeting is a better understanding of what's on the council's mind. And I don't think it's a time to educate them about everything that we know. There will come a point where they're going to be looking at actual language the next go around. I think this is our opportunity and the time we have to get some high level concerns. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't mention some of the things you mentioned, because I think we can add some of that without adding a lot of words. But generally, that would be the philosophy I'd recommend. Commissioner Marsh.
I actually am leaning the same way. I think to the extent that we can distill down to a number of bullet points, and then to the extent that we elaborate in the meeting, and if there are questions, we can target that elaboration to what the questions are. I'm actually in line with that. I do think, to your comment, Jim, about, you know, higher density development and where it would be located, that was actually, as I was thinking about land use element bullet points coming in, that was something that is referenced in the existing comp plan, but I think it is something that has been such a huge part of our discussion for the last year. That is something I would consider adding as a point here, so that the city council has that reference that this is the feedback we've got, this is what we understand the community is interested in terms of how development, higher density development should be cited.
Could you repeat what you'd like to see in this memo? Just can distill it to what you'd like to see in this memo?
I can reference my notes here just a sec. The note I made earlier was, there were actually two related notes. Reference community preference to locate higher density development in downtown. Well, I think that's the relevant one here.
So that's what our current comp plan says. So that's not a change.
Agreed, but it's also been probably 75% of the conversation that we've had with community members and here at the dais for the last year. I mean, it feels to me like not to address that is there's an 800-pound gorilla that we're not pointing out here, because that's been such a part. I mean, and it is intertwined with the housing element. It's intertwined with economic development. I mean, and I don't care if it's in the land use element. I mean, I don't care how we reference it here, but it feels to me like it should be referenced somewhere. And that's just my 2 cents.
No, I think it's a good point. You're calling out what's not changing per se that's important. I think that's totally
Yeah.
valid.
I agree. I think also a resident here, heard a lot of things. Also, a lot in assumption, a lot of things are going to change because of the housing bill. So it's important to affirm this is not changing from previous plan.
Okay, we'll add that.
Do you guys disagree?
No, I think we just agreed to add it. I didn't hear anybody disagree with your, yep. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to provide some background on the conversations we've had and how we led to no change.
Would it be useful for SCJ to do any sort of overview on the efforts to date and what we've heard at these different junctures, such as the housing, like the first open house, second open house, and the survey? Would it be helpful to have them kind of go over that information briefly?
Oh, the mic, while nobody's talking, I can go off mute. I'm just a big fan of bullet points. I think it's just for readability's sake, right? I didn't like the vision statement thing. I made that perfectly clear when we were getting ready for the surveys. I think it's messy, kind of fluffy language is what I was calling it. It wasn't clear. I wanted a survey that was like, one of those romantic, who's your match conversations with, do you like to read books or get hugs? Do you want him to mow the lawn, or do you want him to, that I like things simple, and I feel like a bullet point that just says, where will the new developments be? Will we accommodate parking, or will we encourage people, parking? Where will new housing be? How, setbacks, public safety, just like something that lights out everything so we don't miss anything, right? Because I just feel like we're only it sounds funny to say, we're only gonna have 90 minutes with the council members, and it'd be silly if we got through it and didn't talk about where the new housing is gonna be. We've talked about it, like Scott said, 75%. At least 75% of our conversation, I feel like, was around where is the housing gonna be? And we made big boards that said, do you wanna mix it up? Do you want it in the residential areas? Do you not want it in the residential, And so I just feel like a bullet point to kind of make sure we touch on the topics. And if the council members say, no, Charlie, I agree with what you guys think on this, let's move on, then we can bounce on to the next topic. But I agree that it just, to the extent we can make sure we touch on the main salient points through all the different elements and simplify that. I'd like that better than, a big long sentence that maybe I just don't pay enough attention. I kind of get lost in the sentence. But if it says parking, we're talking about parking.
Okay, well, I'm not sure what we'd say about parking. We didn't propose any change in the comprehensive plan regarding parking. We didn't come to any consensus that I'm aware of, so I don't know what we would say that would represent the commission's view on parking. It's a community, it comes up in community conversation, but I don't know how we would report on it in this memo. As far as the housing goes, I think if I'm hearing you right, you would like to see it called out that we're going to continue to maintain the focus on most housing be directed to the downtown, and then we would comply with state law when it comes to duplexes and other things that are already allowed in the single-family neighborhoods. Am I reading you correctly?
I guess it goes back to what's the purpose of the meeting. To me, this is a conversation between two people with a lot of big decisions to make around some very important issues that are going to dictate the future of the city over the next decade. And it's kind of like Maggie said, right? We've discussed that an issue a lot. We decided we don't want to change this. I still think it's worth having a conversation with, with the 7 council members around this. So maybe they've got a different perspective, because ultimately we need them to vote for it. So I think, Charlie, it's kind of what's the point of the conversation? I think the point is to kind of talk through the main issues within the comprehensive plan. It sounds like you're saying, no, Jim, I kind of want to discuss what we've decided to change. Even if we as 7 guys, generally, most of us 7, think something, maybe the council's going to say, no, we want to do this. And so they're going to, and I feel like if we haven't discussed it already, we're missing an opportunity in those 90 minutes to cover the issues, because we're just trying to focus on the things that we want to change instead of just hitting the major points. But if we're like, no, we're going to talk about what we have consensus around and want to change, that's a different purpose of the meeting. Which would be okay. It's just kind of what do we want to be there for?
Okay, well, I thought we had agreed on what the purpose of the memo was earlier. Have Jim's arguments changed your views on what the purpose of the memo should be? Commissioners?
I guess I'm not sure we can't do both. I think that it will require, and I have confidence in our ability, and Charlie, yours as the chairperson of the commission to lead the discussion, to be able to, as an example, bullet point here, it says, ensure new housing developments blend well with the character of existing nearby housing. And I think that when we talk about what that means in the context of the discussion with the city council, we're going to want to talk about what we've heard, right? And that's where I think we would expand on that. And maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, Jim, maybe I'm not, but I think at that point, character of existing nearby housing can mean a lot of things. It can be imputed to mean some not very nice things, but it also, I think what we understand it to mean is, architectural similarity, sound and noise pollution is consistent with what's around it. Parking is going to be part of that, on-street parking. I think that there is room to talk about those kinds of issues, which are still to be fleshed out in the comp plan in the context of that bullet point. And I think that's why I think both can be done. I think we can have the memo reflect these, this is something that we want you to see in a bullet point, but this is the context of that, right?
How would you reflect it? Because I'm kind of puzzled. I think what you're saying is, yes, we want to have that conversation. I would like to have that conversation come from the council. I'd like the council to let us know what they're concerned about. I don't want us to raise issues where we have not proposed a change. Because I think that's just, it's going to be a time waster. We're going to go down a rabbit hole. We have maybe an hour and a half with the council. We have a whole comprehensive plan. We have 7 elements. I think that in a way, this is kind of a Rorschach test to find out what is important to them that is not on our radar.
Well, I don't think I'm disagreeing with that. I think what I'm saying is to say, ensure that housing developments blend well with the character of existing nearby housing. that's a bullet point here, which can mean a number of different things to different people. And I think that that's going to require some conversation. And I'm assuming, maybe I'm incorrectly assuming that when we get into the meeting with the council, that you are going to walk through what these elements are, and we're not just gonna read them out loud to the council, or we're not just gonna have the council sit there and read them. There's gonna be some comment on each of these, or a sentence or two of explanation as to what that means.
Actually, no, I don't envision that at all. I'm glad you raised that, because that kind of gets to some clarity about what we, and maybe what the council wants. The memo is there so the council is prepared beforehand to see what we have identified as the major differences from the status quo. Those are the things that they're going to have to deal with. And then, in an hour and a half, I expect we're going to hear from them about what's important. We told them what the changes are. Let's hear from them what's important. I don't see any benefit to read the memo to expand on it. If they have questions, I think they should ask us. And I think that would be the best use of our time. Because I think we can't anticipate what their concerns are going to be. They may lead us, we may spend the whole hour and a half on housing talking about these very same issues, but let's let the council direct the conversation.
Then if that's the case, I think we need to wordsmith or potentially expand on something like ensure new housing developments blend well with the character of existing nearby housing, so that there's more here for them to reference to understand what that means.
Okay, well,
And I think that might be worth something like parking or
so
such.
the commission has not, there's no wording that was proposed in the comprehensive plan to talk about that. And we could make up wording. I don't mean to say, that's the wrong way to say it. We could supply wording. An individual commissioner or the chair could supply wording, but that does not reflect what our work has been so far. And I think if we do that, if we're going to do that, we're complicating our task quite a bit.
Well, and I think it's also complicated because we don't know what the wording of the comp plan looks like, too. I mean, I guess I would say last week when we sat here and we talked about land use, one of the things I talked about was, and I don't have my notes from that meeting in front of me, unfortunately, but was talking about, do we reference in the land use element that we've got feedback from the community that was, we want, R1, R4, R6, I'm going to use the phrase single-family housing, although I've been chided for using that, single-family neighborhoods, that there are concerns around things like parking, things like increased traffic. And I actually raised that last week. And I didn't propose language at the time because the idea was that SCJ is going to rewrite the element anyway. So, I mean, I think however you want to do it in the meeting and present it, I think if we are saying something like the character of existing nearby housing, I think we may need to give, the point I'm making is we may need to give the council a little bit more to go on. And I at least for one, tried to raise that issue a week ago in terms of that particular issue. And that doesn't mean we agreed on language, but I think it's part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes. I actually also have some thoughts. I think at the beginning of the meeting, I do think, we discussed the changes, and I was also thinking we will discuss what we are going to change to the council. But then I realized through our discussion, I think a lot of a common theme we got from our residents is some of those they don't want. For some of the elements, comp plan elements, or even the housing, people do not want to change. People want to maintain. People want to small, quiet. That's what they like Newcastle about. And I also just look back to my transportation area, and I actually have a specific wording on one of the goals is promote safety, maintain neighborhood characteristics. And I also I will say when I write that, I have certain characteristics in my mind, but I also believe there, we probably will need to, what I try to say is there is a common theme which actually does not clarify change, but I think we probably want to confirm and let council know it's not like we are doing all new things. There are things not changed. It's the same as 10 years ago. It's already in the plan. That's probably will be. I trying to think how we can do both.
My recollection on the housing developments blending well with the characters, that was a general statement, and we didn't get into the specifics, and we haven't gotten into the specifics, and we won't for a while. But that's the intent. We want to make sure that what we do in the way of new housing, mainly duplexes, because that's the only real change, that those fit well within our existing single-family residential areas. And what that looks like in terms of parking, in terms of form of building, how many houses, how many square feet, we haven't really done any of that homework. So the intent is to do it, but we haven't done it yet.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I was gonna say the same thing. I mean, we wrote this down as something we wanna do. But I also think that when we turn this over to the city council in November, like, it's the comp plan, isn't it, plus all the new rules around it? Or is it just the comp plan?
No, it's just the comp plan, the policy, the zoning code comes next year.
Comes next year, okay.
Really quick, we're not turning this over to the city council in November, right? We're getting this to them a lot earlier than November, right?
So right now, the anticipated timeframe for the public review of the document, which would include council, is July.
Bingo,
Yeah,
okay.
but November would be adoption.
Oh, adoption, okay.
So, would it respond to your desires if we added a paragraph in here that emphasized the things that we are not changing? And mentioned the input that we got from the community that we heard and that we are not changing? Is that what I'm hearing you asking for? Okay. We'll do that.
I'm just gonna add something on here. Staff typically prepare an agenda memo, or an agenda bill for council, kind of giving them an overview of where we've been, what the background is. So I could prepare an agenda memo with some of that background information and then explain that these are the changes that are going to be seen. And then from what the status quo vision is, and I could provide a kind of an overview of what the current vision is. And I mean, there's not a lot of change in that vision other than what we have to do to accommodate the state.
This memo is going to be written after this meeting. It's not going to be sent to you for review. There's not time for that. There's no process for that. I am reluctant to try and represent all of your views. So that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to be very conservative in what I put in here. These are the things that I know we agreed upon. And I know that if I put these in the memo, that I will be honoring your intent. And I don't want to stray too far from that, because I don't think I can do it without misrepresenting somebody's point of view, or maybe even the commission's point of view.
So I guess my question was, would staff's sort of synopsis with this attached to it help set the scene, and then having your memo on what the changes are help?
I think that's a good way to approach it. Let's have you take a crack at it, and you and I can work together on that.
Okay.
Okay. Should we move on to parks, or is, all right, I see heads nod, so parks.
Director Fitzgibbons, is it true that SCJ is working on an analysis of the distance, general distance from residential areas to parks?
Yeah.
Right.
A new level of service analysis. Uh-huh.
So that's still in flux a little bit.
Okay, any more other comments on parks? I think we should spend some time talking about land use. So I'm just going to give Commissioner Marsh a heads up that when you're ready to talk about it, we can do that now if you like, or?
Whatever you want to do.
Okay, let's do it now. Land use was not something that I put on here because as I read the changes, I didn't think that they were going to be things that gave the council any heartburn. But Commissioner Marsh, what do you think we should say about land use?
Well, I mean, I don't know that we need to say anything. I had looked at it and I had thought if we weren't going to do a new safety element, which I didn't understand, I thought we weren't. I thought that, safety principles, the integration of safety principles would go there. If we're going to have a separate public safety section, I don't think that we need to repeat that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the proposal was that we incorporate what do you use, the design principles?
SEPTED.
Accepted in this document, but that as we will make a statement then in the next go-around, we
There'll
will
be
have a
separate.
separate safety
That was what I
element.
understood as
Yeah.
well. So, but I didn't know at the time that we were gonna do the memo that we were gonna have a separate category here. So I made notes to that effect. I made the comment about, I think it's important to talk about where we think the highest density development should be. And again, I don't know if that needs to go in land use or if that should be housing or economic development. Related, I think, reference to legal requirements and the mandated levels and not exceeding the mandated levels where we've decided that that's what we've heard from the community. I think that would be, I guess I would have expected that would be something that would show up in land use, but that may be something that gets incorporated throughout. There is more than half of the land use policies are about natural resources and natural features. And I think that we talked about that being redrafted so it's more efficient and it's not nearly as redundant. Substantively, that may not be a huge change, but I think when it goes from half of the element to much less, that's maybe something that the council might want to be aware of or understand why. So those were some notes that I had. But again, I don't know how anybody else feels about those things or if those are things that can be frankly incorporated in other aspects.
I think if it's an element, we should have it as a header, even if we only mention that we consolidated all those redundant natural resources comments. I mean, it's kind of like what Maggie said, maybe we don't have to say we didn't change, but maybe we decided we're going to say we don't change. Since it's a full-on element in the comprehensive plan, I think it at least deserves a header.
I think the reality of it is it's going to reflect a lot of the changes that are identified in these other categories here. So whether it shows up, I don't want form to drive the discussion, it should be substance. And whether it's as it is here and there's no land use or not, I personally don't care. I just want to make sure we cover the things we need to cover.
Could we go back to what, there was a comment you made that, I think it was the one just before you were talking about the duplication with land use, not land use, but with protected areas. I don't know if you remember what that was, but that, I didn't fully understand that and I wanted to make sure I did because maybe that was one of the things that we needed to include here.
Let me see, I had the safety language, I had
It was after that, I think.
higher density downtown, or focused higher density development downtown. And then, there needs to be, I thought, better reference to legal requirements, specifically in the land use element. I thought that was an appropriate place for that.
Was there anything, what was the point after that?
Well, and to the extent that we decide that we're going to propose, if we're gonna do what's required and not more, if we're going to do, I mean, I think one of the things that we heard and that was discussed a lot is something, I think was part of what we were talking about earlier, which is, what do we do with the requirements? Are we going to meet them? Are we going to look at doing more than those? That was a big part of our discussion. That was a lot of the scenarios. Is that something that we would address as well and say, look, we got feedback from the community and there are these new legal requirements, and what we heard is X. You know, people understand we need to do what we need to do, but we're not, we're getting feedback not to do more, right? I think that's been a huge part of our discussion.
So
That probably could be mentioned somewhere, whether it's land use or somewhere else.
yeah, I think that would be a good point to have in the housing element, because I think that's primarily what we're talking about, right? The reference to legal requirements, I think that was the comment you made where I wanted to be sure I understood that. So what you're saying is that we should make more explicit in the comprehensive plan that this is to comply with such and such a legal requirement?
I think my thought is two things. I think yes, absolutely that we need to be clear that there are legal requirements that we need to comply with, and we need to be clear what they are. And I think we also need to do a better job than the current comp plan does. This is just my personal opinion. I don't think it's something we've discussed, but I necessarily, so maybe this doesn't belong, but a comment I made last week when we were talking about the land use element is there are a lot of things that are sort of referenced and incorporated, but they're not done specifically. There aren't specific sites. There are terms that are used that are not, they're defined terms, or they're terms with meaning in the statutes that aren't clear. I think that needs to be cleared up. And specifically in the land use element, but I suspect throughout.
So I think those recommendations are really, really important for SCJ to understand, because that's going into their rewrite. Do you think that's something that we want to raise to the council's attention?
I think to the extent that we have more specific and different and impactful legal requirements than we've had previously with regard to things like housing, I think we should say we're asking SCJ to be more specific about what those are and clarify what's a requirement and what's not.
Would it be okay with you if we have a section that talks generally about what SCJ's charge is in rewriting the comp plan, and then mention these points in that section, that they're going to take out the duplication, they're going to reference the legal requirements? Because it seems like it's greater than a land use item. It's across the entire comprehensive plan.
Yeah, it's a great point, Charlie, and I think that maybe so, because these are structural things that need to be addressed. Mm-hmm. I agree. So, whether we do that as something specific to SCJ or whether frankly, the reason I was raising it at all in the context of this conversation is I think that part is going to look different to the city council than what they've seen in this comp plan. Mm-hmm. And I think that explaining to them why it's going to look different is important. Okay. So that was why I thought it belonged.
Good. I think that's something we would put right up front before we even get into the other elements. Okay.
I would like to suggest, as part of the land use before, I just want to make sure we're not moving on from that, but the concept of nodes and third spaces have been pretty popular. So that's something that is new for Newcastle to have that.
The concept of what?
Nodes and third spaces, the third scenario, has been pretty popular in feedback that we've received, even on the surveys, and I think that'll need to be addressed.
Is SCJ, do we have feedback that SCJ is going to be drafting to that in the?
They'll be talking to it, yeah.
Then we probably should be prepared to have that be part of it.
Okay, shall we move on to utilities?
Before I forget, completely unrelated, I think it'd be really helpful to have like a PDF document of all this stuff that we've got looked at, like the summaries, and she's given us all sorts of documentation to go through. I think it'd be nice to have that. I don't, print them out, you kill too many trees, not worth it. But something so we can reference it, so when I say, I thought such and such percent wanted cottages, and I thought such and such percent. And also the, like the surveys, you gave us copies of the piece of paper where people had comments, and they filled out the little dots with, I like this scenario. I would not print it out, but to the extent we can all have one document we're looking at, one common document, so I can say, can you guys look at page 392 of the Fitzgibbons PDF, and you guys can look at what I'm referencing? Is that something that, I'm saying this would take 15 minutes just to kind of pull together the documentation we've gone through, just as a way of having a common reference point. So it's not Scott holding up, oh no, it's page 8 on mine, oh no, it's page 14 on mine. I know it's unrelated to what you want to go to next, Charlie, but since it's in my brain, I'm just saying it might be helpful if we as a commission and they as a council, and also anybody else that's listening, could look at a common document that I'm guessing is going to be 200 some pages, but that we could all say, can you guys all look at page 76, because there's a comment made here, or there's a number made here I want to flesh out, or there's language here, or whatever it might be. The comprehensive plan should definitely be something we can all look at if we want to, but also, in addition, survey comments, survey results, percentages, other things that you provided to us. I'm not asking you to do too much, but would you be willing to put those into a PDF, and so we could all reference them as one group during the meeting? So if I want to say, 48% of all residents, prefer cottages, would support cottages, and Scott says, no, they didn't. I can say, oh yeah, look at page 82 right here. Is that something you could provide easily?
Yeah, I guess my question would be, would you rather have one PDF or multiple in a common folder?
One PDF that we can click on and reference, not something that, not some 8 megabit thing you would print out. It'd be a waste of, it'd be silly, right? I'm talking about something I can, just like if I want to look at the agenda for tonight's meeting, I can go to www.newcastle.com, click on it, pulls it up, and I can read it right on my browser. A similar thing, you could create one I could do it for you, where it's just all in one big long PDF, and all the page numbers are right there. So when Brian says, hey, can we take a look at page 689? I want to look at something. We can all pull it up, and Brian could say, right here, the language says this, and we can all quickly and easily look at it together. That might be helpful. And I didn't know when to say that, Charlie, so I'm saying it now. I should say I'm requesting it now just to make it simpler, instead of us saying, oh, is it on page 6 on mine? It's on page 8 on his.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
Commissioner Lowe.
yes, that reminds me one thing. Do we actually have, does the consultant compile the survey when we had the scenario thing, open house? I remember I received those pages, comments. I don't recall there is like a survey summary. Because I actually, just for fun, because I think it's like a 36, it's not a lot. And I just want to see, the percentage in terms of scenario A, B, C. And if I recall, I think a majority is still the A, which is minimum. And I do remember, like even when I came here, I see a lot of dots on there, but on that 36, the percentage pick a scenario 3 is not majority. And I just don't remember there is actually a compiled survey for us.
They haven't compiled it. To be honest, on scenario 3, I think if 30% of the respondents said we're kind of interested in this, it would be worthwhile in the future having an effort to study it. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but just having, and this is from staff standpoint, I always, you only get so much of the city responding to survey, and only so much of the city coming to those meetings. I think it's still, some of these things I think can be policy or considerations for the future, as well as things that are required through the comp plan. Like the city should continue to look at nodes as an option, for example. That's just staff's opinion. That's not set in stone, but there is not a compilation that they did, no, to answer your question.
Okay. Any comments on utilities?
Boy, I'll just say, I don't remember the sign code on charging stations, but good notes, whoever wrote that down. Yeah, you do, yeah, totally. Whew.
It was hard to see because in the document that was handed out to us when we discussed this, it was black and white, and this was, the changes were in color, and this one, you couldn't tell that it was a change from it. You may recall that they pulled out the charging stations from Safeway because it violated the sign code, and I think we want those charging stations in Safeway, and we'd be happy to put advertising on them, right? So. Okay, transportation. Microphone?
My overall thing about the transportation really is those transportation need to accommodate the future growth. And also, I think it's kind of in line with the street lights, but also a little bit broader level of service. But I think at that time it was said that there is no level of service agreement, something.
No level of service standard for transportation, is that what you're?
Level of service, there's, because I have a note here highlighted is the transportation P15 street classification policies under. I have a note here is the city should establish a limit for the maximum number of residents served on the dead end and the cul-de-sac streets, and I added consistent with the level of service agreement. I think what it was said is there's no level of service agreement. I guess what I'm trying to make sure we have in the plan is in terms of the streets, so there's like a snow plowing or the lights, or there's a parking, off-street parking, all those. I think we discussed around quality of life, level of service. So how I would like those things be maintained. With the growth there, I would like the residents' quality of life will be maintained. Even when there are a lot of growth, maybe there are not enough snow plowing cars when it snowed, because city only have 3, and now we have that tripled or doubled residence units need to cover, or there's all those, because of the growth, people need to park the cars on the streets, and there will be some safety issues, some crime, and we don't want those. That's what I was thinking of, the service, level of service or quality of life. I guess I just want to make sure those things will be maintained even when we have those growths, because hopefully it's not a contradictory thing. People shouldn't compete. Whether we are building new house, then I need to sacrifice some of my living standards. I mean, I'm not saying mine, but, general population residents.
Commissioner Quigg?
That we saw that in a lot of the comments too. What you're saying is if we're gonna grow, we have to have the infrastructure to support the growth. And we saw that in comment after comment in the survey around people, well, if we're gonna grow, we better make sure we have enough, whatever, streets, sewage, lights, electricity, all that kind of stuff. So I saw that in several of the comments. And are you saying, Maggie, you want it in the memo to be something that's,
I want in the memo.
Next speaker.
Sorry. I would like in the memo will say, yes, we are, we are going to meet those growth targets. At the same time, we also commit, we are going to maintain, keep the service of, the living standards for the residents of Newcastle.
Director Fitzgibbons?
This is an RCW growth management requirement, the concurrency requirement that Brian brought up earlier to do that. So it's in our current plan. But if I remember, or if I was going to extrapolate from the conversation before, it's maybe going above and beyond concurrency in a way to promote quality of life for pedestrians, especially with transportation and streets, promote quality of life for pedestrians and cyclists in all modes as well, like really considering the safety and quality beyond just concurrency. Just the requirement.
I will say yes or no. I think yes, it will be go above and beyond, like we want to promote EV charging as another way, right? So that's not something we already done today. But overall, I think it's like we would like, the society is evolving, technology is developing, and I think the residents do deserve those kind of service.
I wonder if there's something, if this language isn't already, if there isn't already language like this in the introduction to the comprehensive plan when it talks about general principles. I think what you're suggesting, Maggie, it's a very broad comprehensive plan and requirement or directive. It covers everything in the plan. It wouldn't be limited to one element or another. And it's also something that I think everybody in the city wants. And that is the most frustrating thing to achieve because you can't stop growth. And so we keep accepting growth and we keep paying a little price for every little bit more growth that we absorb. I'm trying to think of how we can incorporate that into the comprehensive plan, and it seems to me that it would be in the introduction to the plan. There's already an introduction that covers some broad concepts like that. If it's not there, that's where I think maybe it ought to be. Mm-hmm. So this is not something we discussed like this in any of our meetings. Does the commission support putting something like this into the preamble? Okay, everybody agrees, so we will add that.
while Charlie's writing, I'm going to ask, we're going to have a town hall coming up soon. Are we going to discuss any of that as part of this conversation, or we're not talking, because we're going to have the town hall, we're going to be there. Are we going to cover that at all before we adjourn tonight's meeting?
We can. We talked about it at our last meeting. But But if there's something that is unresolved, sure, we can talk about it. Bring it up if you still think we need to talk about it.
In the context of the housing element, just what's it gonna be like at the town hall? Like, how do you want us to handle that environment when people are asking issues about, is the quality of life gonna be maintained through all the growth? I mean,
I don't think you can answer every question that you're asked. I don't think we have the answers, right? So I would say, do your best.
are we gonna be staying at a table? Are we gonna mingle? What's, do you know? I was just wondering.
I envision a table where we have the posters that are down in the lobby of City Hall right now, be somewhere where people can get up close to them, and we're there to listen to them as they, and help them understand them and talk about the process, and just, it's really a replay of what we did at the open house. Okay. Maggie, you made one other comment that I'm not sure if I understood what you were asking for. You mentioned, because I'm not sure if it was a separate comment or if it was related to the one we just resolved, and that has to do with number of houses on a cul-de-sac.
Sorry, not number of houses, but the cul-de-sac houses will get the consistent service. So it will be addressed when we have a preamble talk about those infrastructure concurrent.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to public safety. And I think, so, I think there might be a little, I'm a little confused about what we agreed on. I heard Brian say that we agreed to work on incorporating this into an element. In an earlier conversation today about this memo, Director Fitzgibbon's recollection was that we didn't commit to an element. We committed to working on something that was more flexible, that could possibly end up as an element, but might end up in something else. So I guess I want to check back in with the commission to find out what your desire is. Commissioner Marsh?
I think that's, as you just phrased it, that's what I was thinking.
Which one?
That it might be, the second one, that it might be something that does become an element or not, but it's something that, for now, we're going to incorporate it throughout the plan, accepted, and then in the future, we're going to consider it, whether it becomes an element or just an enhanced safety feature that gets built into the future plan.
Okay. Commissioner Marsh?
My understanding was along those lines as well, is that this was something that we were, my recollection from our last conversation was that we didn't expect to have a specific element this time, and that we were going to incorporate these ideas throughout, as is referenced here. And in fact, my recollection was we talked about, could we reference in this comp plan, we would anticipate or we would want to move toward having a specific element in the future, and we decided that that was not appropriate, but it was more appropriate to just reference the concepts with the expectation that would show up over time.
Any other commissioners have any comment? And I think the language then that is here on this memo is good as far as it goes. Are there any changes you'd make in that language? Okay. Economic development.
I'll just say this is, I think, what we talked about last week.
Could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it.
Oh, I was saying, this is my recollection from last week of what we
Okay.
talked about, so I don't have any changes to it.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to capital facilities.
Oh, I'm sorry, I have a question on the economic development. Do we need to add anything about the proposed either committee, commission, body that works on economic development?
It's already in the existing plan.
Yeah, okay, so just, okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's already, I think it's in the appendix, actually.
Yeah,
But we talked about moving some of the appendix stuff to the main element.
Okay.
And then it kind of just, so, yeah.
I got to follow up on what Aaron just pointed out. I mean, there's a few things that keep recurring themes with me over and over the years. I really would love Newcastle to have an identity. There's wine country. There's people. Leavenworth is a Christmas town. And Paul said, do we want to refer? Or maybe Aaron asked it. I love the second bullet point: develop a city identity. I just want to say I'm glad that's there. And I don't know if we have to have another bullet point or just make sure that we discuss the possibility of getting some people together and saying, is this something we want to go after? Do we want to try to follow Woodinville's lead in terms of having a, identity around something? What would that be? Is it possible to get enough people to agree on something that we could do it? I don't want to talk about this for 5 minutes. That's just something, I'm glad that's there. And if we have a committee or a board or an advisory thing, it doesn't have to be a full level commission, but I think it'd be something that could really help the economic vitality of Newcastle if we weren't just flyover country to get from Renton to Bellevue, but we had an identity.
Okay, how about capital facilities? Any comments on that section?
I appreciate the way that this is drafted in that these are aspirational, and I know we got to the point where we were almost joking about whether something should be a shall or a should. And I appreciate that this is written in a context that these are ideas that we think are good recommendations. And I just wanted to note that it was, I appreciated that.
Okay. So we've covered all of the topics. I think it would be good if I kind of summarized for you what the takeaways are to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So, starting at the top, in the introduction, we will clarify that the commission that these recommendations do represent a majority of the commission supporting the general direction described here. We would have a section separate from any of the elements that would talk about SCJ's charge to rewrite the plan, restructure the plan, I think, so that there's less duplication and that it is condensed and it makes more explicit that we are complying with legal requirements and list some of those requirements, the ones that are primary. We would have a section about the preamble that would talk about, have a bullet about maintaining the quality of life in the midst of growth. I'll say though, if the preamble, I'll reread it, and if it's already in there, I would say we wouldn't need that because we're only pointing out changes. But if it's not there, we would have a bullet here in this memo saying that it'll be added to it. In the housing section.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
On the notes here thank you, Brian. I'm sorry to interrupt, but on the notes here, preamble, the complete streets and this, what
Traffic calming?
what is, I guess I'm not clear what complete streets is intended to be.
So that's what I was talking with Commissioner Lowe about, was these are concepts that go beyond concurrency. Complete Streets being designed for all modes, designing to slow down traffic. That's a big thing that we talk about right now. And then traffic calming is a subset of that, using techniques to slow down traffic. And that's something that's in a big discussion right now. We also talked about street lighting. We talked about other things that I feel like are not in the code right now. I was going to ask you guys at the end of your overview if
I guess my question about it is that then are these items that you've listed here things that we would include in the memo as things that we've discussed, or are these just notes for your reference? I'm just curious what
What are you pointing to? Because I'm not sure we're getting
Here,
complete
on
streets.
your screen.
Oh, these are the notes she has been writing. Okay, I haven't even been looking at
I'm
these.
sorry, and I'm curious of whether I'm curious if there's stuff that's showing up here that's going to show up in the memo, or if it's just these are just reference notes for later. I didn't. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you raised that.
Sorry to distract.
I'm glad you raised that. So would you repeat your answer now that I understand the question?
These are programs or policies that we could implement for the consideration of maintaining quality of life elements. SEPTED, complete streets, traffic calming are things that have come up in our discussions in one way or another. I know with Jeff, complete streets and traffic calming have come up. I don't have to, we can take them out of the memo. But I would not be surprised if these concepts came up in the comp plan. Again, under the umbrella of maintaining the quality of life.
Mhm. I'm not, I know we've discussed complete streets, but I don't know what the definition of it is. I'd say, if we mention it here, we need to describe what that is for the benefit of people who aren't planners.
Yeah, I mean, it could be as easy as taking out the jargon and just saying designing for all modes of transportation and maintaining safe speeds and neighborhoods for play.
So that makes sense to me, because that reminds me of a conversation we had about streets that facilitate pedestrian and bicycle use and connectivity. Okay. In the housing section, we would make more explicit that that people continue to prefer development be channeled downtown, and that's where it will continue to go, and that the development that is aimed for the single-family zoned areas will be to conform with the minimum state requirements. The rest of this, the housing bullet, the third housing bullet would be part of a separate section where we talk about other government requirements, and we would mention in there that these are things that have only come to our attention recently, and that we still have work to do about it. No changes in parks, utilities, or transportation, because the things we talked about with transportation are going to go into the preamble. Land use, public safety, no change. Economic development, no change. Capital facilities, no change. Under land use, we would mention the interest and support for nodes. And the other things that we talked about when we were discussing land use would go into section about what SCJ is charged to do in terms of organizing the rewrite. Have I missed anything? Another thing that another thing we discussed is that this memo would be part of I forget what the term you used, Aaron, agenda memo,
Agenda bill,
agenda bill. So, and as part of the agenda bill, Aaron would put in some introductory language. So in terms of process,
Chair
yes,
Gaddick,
go ahead.
I have a go back. On the land use, do we also said that we want to kind of maybe also in the preamble or in the general, we'll say we'll need to in compliance with this, the new requirement, the legal requirements.
Yes.
I just, on terms of transportation for Maggie's element, the issue that kept on coming up over and over from people was speeding. Is that something we want to address, or is that already covered, or is that a topic that's part of the element at all?
Which one?
I was thinking, I was going through when I asked you about the town hall conversation, reminded me of the conversations I had. One of the things was about parking. Some guy talked to me for a straight 15 minutes about parking. Another thing people asked me over and over again was speeding. And is that something that we need to put as a bullet point in this memo, or is it inappropriate, not really a comprehensive plan issue?
I think that's some sort of traffic calming, right? Yeah, it is there.
Yeah, so it could either be in the preamble or we could move it to transportation. Or we could put the less jargony term in the preamble and the jargon in transportation.
I'm anti-jargon generally.
They teach us not to do that in planning school.
Talk to me like a third grader.
Me too.
So the next step, I will rewrite this, incorporating everything that we just talked about. Then I'm going to ship it to Erin, and she's going to use it as material for the agenda bill. And Erin, after you add the parts that you think are appropriate for the agenda bill, would you send it back to me for comment on it?
Yep.
And then it would be delivered to the city council in what way?
It goes to them with their packet. So packets are due the 14th.
Is that when they're delivered to the council?
They'll be delivered, I think, the 16th. I think it's the Thursday prior to the meeting.
Does the packet include the Jim Quigg wish for a big Bible of all the stuff we want to discuss, like the giant? And by the way, is that something that Aaron Qualls can make? I feel like I keep asking for things, turning to you and asking you to do work, you know. Is that something our consultant can do? I literally just was hoping for like a consolidated document that has all this stuff that we would probably want to reference during our conversation, so that when I'm looking at page 182, other people can look at what I'm looking at. Is that something our consultant gets paid to do, or is that going to cost us extra?
It's kind of the same bucket in a way. I have the documents, and I know how to do that, so it's not going to take a long time. We'll get it made though. Hopefully, you'll have everything you want in it.
Is it possible, since I think a lot of this stuff is already accumulated on the website, to just have like, if this is going to be, the memo, if it's going to be distributed electronically, can it be jump linked to the website, and then can we have it virtually available as opposed to having big stacks of, I don't know if this is going to achieve what you're hoping to achieve, but it just seems like it could save a lot of trees and effort.
Well, as I said multiple times, Commissioner Marsh, I don't want to burn trees. I want one document, like, so when I'm saying, can you look at page 482, instead of, oh, I'm sorry, click on that. No, click on that link. Okay, can I get on this quick page? I've been in so many countless meetings. We had a bunch of highly paid, smart, college-educated folks who couldn't literally get on the same page. So I'm saying, I just say, look, I'm going to put it all in one document. I'm going to send a quick link out to a SharePoint site. I want you guys to have that ready to go, so when I want to look at page 482, you can look at, so we're not wasting half the meeting trying to literally get on the same page. Or if you think we can pull it off with, like, 5 different links to 5 different documents and make it, I'm just guessing it could be, I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible. We only have 90 minutes, so, but I also don't want to put more work on you, Aaron.
So either way, it's going to become part of one giant PDF because that's what happens when it goes into the packet. So it's either going to be single links to the documents, or it's from the agenda bill, or from the agenda for the planning, you're the planning commission, city council, or it's going to be a separate fat document that I make. But we'll work it out and we'll get them in there. And
But you don't print it, do you?
No.
Thank God.
I've done more printing for the commission in the last month just because of all these things that have been coming up, but typically we try to be electronic. Yeah.
Okay, well, that concludes our conversation and our general business. We will open our second public comment period. Would anyone in the audience like to make a comment? Nobody does, so we will close the public comment period. All right, our next 2 meetings are May 21st, the joint meeting, plan on 5:30 unless we hear otherwise. And then May 21st, meeting with SGJ right after the council joint meeting. And right now, we're not planning on a meeting following, but as I understand it, we're just going to cancel that meeting if we want to. The Wednesday meeting is still going to be noticed, but we may cancel it.
Right. If we
Right.
have no agenda items other than continued discussion and we don't have a quorum, then we have no meeting.
Okay. So to our devoted citizens, pay attention to that so you don't come here and we're not here to join you.
Yeah, we'll try to put it out on the website and do whatever we can.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.